This is Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. We're here on Xbox Series S. Be sure to like the video. Subscribing is great as well. So this is the long-awaited expansion, or well, DLC for Elden Ring. It's been a couple years and we're back on the Series S to take a look at this new world, this new place, and this generally new area to discover and explore, which gives new challenges, new monsters, and lots of new bosses to die tragically to in a variety of many annoying and rather cheap ways. Cool. Let's dive in and talk about the technical details. So there have been many updates to the Series S, and just in Elden Ring in general, since release, but let's go over the technical stuff. We got prioritized quality, which is like 1440p at 60 FPS, and then we have the prioritized frame rate, which is 1080p at 60 FPS, and there are dynamic elements for both of them. So this is a game that is a little challenging, needless to say. So I would recommend, if you probably will need the absolute best performance you can, so you probably will want to play this expansion with the performance mode on. It is a noticeable decrease in visual fidelity for this particular experience, but it is one that will make sure you're getting closer to the full, nice, smooth frame rate that is kind of required to make sure you're getting those perfect kind of like hits in and stuff, because this is a rather difficult and intensive expansion for you to embrace. So in order to access this new aspect and new part of the game, you will need to defeat a couple of the main game bosses in order to actually get to this area. So you'll probably want to, I guess, I don't know how to describe it. I'm assuming people that want this expansion will have played enough of the main game to come in here and play this expansion. You get what I mean? But at the same time, I guess it's not necessarily a great idea to assume that people will. So, if you're trying to come in here fresh, you've never played the game before, you just want to play the expansion, you can't do that. You have to work through the main game to a certain percentage of it, or, well, to a certain level of crazy bosses, in order to even activate and touch the creepy hand, in order to come here and actually do this expansion. So just keep that in mind as sort of a precursor requisite for being able to actually dive into the world of this Erdtree, or, well, the shadow of the Erdtree. Quite a bit of popping on the Series S, too. Quite a bit. Yeah, so it is, I guess, from a technical standpoint, like a demanding world, but it's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's not too bad on the Series S, let's put it that way. They've done some good updates. They've cleaned things up. This is in line with the main game. It just has some areas that are a little crazier on performance than other areas, and the Series S does an okay job with it in terms of the quality mode and also performance, if you do want to make sure you are getting that frame rate. I just love to talk about the technical side of things, because I do think they are important elements of your experience when you're going about in this world, and that's why I kind of circle around back to it. So anyways, the story, well, there's this story kind of thing is like a backdrop sort of thing that you discover along the way, but essentially, you're in this new land. It's a brand new area, a brand new world to explore, new bosses, new foes, new land masses to see, new challenges, hidden dungeons, secret side bosses, lots of stuff. Now, I did find with this DLC in particular that you will, there's lots of open areas that don't really have a whole lot going on, if that makes sense. And it's a little bit more spaced out in terms of stuff going on. I feel like the main game, there's always, from one area to one area to one area, there's always, stuff going on. Whereas in this game, it doesn't feel like there's as much stuff going on. You're kind of, at times, just sort of going through these kind of quiet, empty places where they've occasionally littered the same sorts of enemies, like, over and over again. Like, this really does seem to kind of use and reuse certain enemies within the environment, like the minions. And some of the minions, some of the cannon fodder minions, are, like, strangely tough, too, in the environment. Like, it's kind of annoying. And, like, I love the sense of scale that's present in the Elden Ring experience and in Shadow of the Erdtree. But this one's kind of annoying in the sense that, like, it's very much focused on verticality. So, like, you see this, like, you get on top of these places, but, like, it's such a pain to get on top of these places. Like, in the original game, it was kind of cool trying to figure out how to get to some of the areas. And, like, in this one, I'm just sitting there most of the time sort of just perplexed, being like, this is way too high. Like, it's a lot harder to get from point A to point B, and you have to, like, find, like, these mysterious hidden passageways and stuff, which in itself can be cool to some degree, but it is a little bit more annoying when the map feels so segmented to a degree that it makes it a lot harder and less fun to actually explore the world of Elden Ring, because the big part for me of this is I find the boss fights aggressively annoying, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, particularly for the expansion in a bit. But, like, the fun of it really for me was sort of taking in this world where it's this desolate, sort of creepy landscape and landmass, and, you know, there's all this, like, stuff going on, and it's a dense world of chaos and loss and suffering and all that. And then, like, it's just this really weird, like, oh, I can't believe I never grabbed that. It just doesn't have that same sort of rewarding sense of exploration like the main game did. It's just, like, more tedious to get places. And that's a lot of this expansion, is just, like, a really tedious progression where, like, every inch of it is kind of like a pain to get through. Is kind of the best I can describe it. Like, it's honestly kind of annoying at times to go from, like, one area to the next. And I didn't really feel that as much with the main game. That's kind of the way I'm sort of describing it, is just the sense of, like, it's just annoying to try to get places and to try to do things in this game. And it's kind of, like, tiresome. Like, it's more Elden Ring for those that liked Elden Ring, but it's like a different game altogether still, which is weird. So, like, I found the main game challenging and hardcore, but it was sort of the puzzle of, you know, figuring out a boss, figuring out a challenge, doing a thing. And then you get to this world, and it's sort of just annoying, and the bosses are, like, invincible. And then you get to, like, a finale boss, which honestly I couldn't even beat the end boss. I got there, and I was just, it literally didn't even feel physically doable unless I, like, completely respect or changed my character or did something ridiculous to be able to achieve that. And it was taking, like, you know, like, I'm not a hardcore Dark Souls player. I've played a lot of them. I did beat the main game. Like, I did actually go through it all, and I accomplished it. And there was just something about the bosses here. It was taking me several hours to beat some of them. They were just ridiculous. It was unfair and cheap, and the hitboxes, and it was kind of wonky and awkward, and it just wasn't really well done, if that makes sense, like the bosses. And it felt like a bit of a boss rush. Like, typically in the main game of Elden Ring, you know, you are going from place to place fighting monsters and bosses, but for this game, it just felt so focused on going from one big boss to the next big boss. And you kind of lost a little bit of the magic of the exploration, also the exploration being so, like, you know, here's an island area you can get to, but then you can't get over there, and you can't get over here, and if you jump down, you're gonna get killed by stuff. And, you know, as in the falling damage and stuff like that. And it was just such, like, a weird change from something that I felt was done a lot more efficiently and effectively in the main game. Like, it just tonally, gameplay-wise, felt like an entirely different sort of game. And they've thrown out the traditional sort of leveling. It's like, yes, to a degree, your leveling matters that you did prior, but they've got these new fragment systems where essentially the fragments and the fragments, people don't shut up about them, are like a big part of the game. Is you need these fragments to be able to kind of be able to do things and to be able to do like survive. And I didn't find them to be like the craziest change up. The more and more I added, I just didn't really find that they were crazily changing what I was able to do in the game. But some people just, swear by their adjustments to gameplay, but I don't really see that that was the case. And then all these like side enemies that like somehow mulch you up. And like I said, they're just like, it's the same types of like side enemies over and over again as you explore this world, like shadow figures, the small little guys. They're just the same things scattered throughout this world. And the thing is like, yeah, it's an expansion, so like assets are going to be reused and whatever. But like, it took, like a couple of years for this to come together, and it's just like a little disappointing in the sense that like, I don't know, I just kind of expected more. Like, that's a big theme in this, is I just really wanted more from this expansion. I just felt really kind of let down by it. And like, again, going to those like bosses, it was just, some of it is just ridiculous. Like, absolutely ridiculous in every sense. And I just couldn't comprehend why some of them were so brutal, in the sense that you literally barely could do anything. They'd be like leaping at you when you enter the fog and mist. You wouldn't even be able to like do anything or prepare. And then that end boss is just like a level on top of it of insanity, if that makes sense. Like, it's really weird. Like, you'd have to create some kind of perfect build thing to be able to just do the final boss. And it's just, some of the stuff felt so insanely gnarly in this, just to be like annoying to the degree I couldn't believe it. Like, there was, to some sense, like puzzle fulfillment, I guess, in the bosses of the regular game. And like, yeah, they can be frustrating, they can be annoying, they could be really hardcore. But like, I never felt the annoyance that I felt attempting to do like the bosses and stuff in this game. Like, it was just absolutely ridiculous game. DLC, expansion, whatever you want to call it. And that was so utterly annoying, because I kind of was, to a degree, looking forward to this, and sort of hyped up in the sense that, like, oh, this is a big thing, it's going to be more of what we experienced. I'm kind of confident that I got, like, a setup that can take me into this setup, so that I'm, like, proficient, like I put in the hours, the tens and tens of hours. And then, like, you just feel, like, worthless playing this. It's terrible. That's what I'm saying, is like, if you are like the hardcore of hardcore for the Souls-like genre, you're gonna have a really good time with this, I guess, if you just love dying over and over again. If you aren't, but you liked Elden Ring and you wanted more of that, this doesn't really necessarily feel like more of that. I mean, it looks like it to a degree, but it doesn't really feel like that. And if you're like a casual, non-Souls fan that's kind of like, oh, well, Elden Ring's always been kind of neat to me, maybe this is a good time to get into it. Just be warned that it is brutal and incredibly aggressively unforgiving. And this DLC just kind of takes that a step up and way beyond the scope of anything for difficulty in the main game. Like, this is just utterly ridiculous and unfair. The bosses and the moments in this, like, it's utterly insane, some of the things you have to do in order to actually, like, progress or even make it to like a new kind of situation in battle in this one. It's really, really quite uncomfortably awkward, which is a shame, because like I said, I love the exploration, I love the sense of the main game. And this DLC, I have a hard time recommending it, because it's just so ridiculously brutal to be brutal beyond the scope of like anything I've ever seen from another video game. It's just like, it's dumb at times. Like, it's really genuinely just stupid. Some of like the design choices for the bosses and the foes and the challenge of things. It's just like, every inch of this is a tedious annoyance, and it's just disappointing, because like I said, I got through the main game, and I kind of thought to some degree I was going to be prepared for this, and then I was just like, wow, this just sucks. Like, I love, you know, the sense of scale and freedom and the things you get to see and the places you get to go. It's really cool. They've crafted a nice, large, chunky world, but it's like it's hard to traverse. It's hard to fight the bosses. It's hard to deal with the bosses. If you summon extra people, it makes it harder to do some of the bosses. And it's just like there's not really narrative supporting it either. Like if you go and you read extra things and blah blah blah, there's stuff you come across, but like it just doesn't do a very effective job, in my opinion, of actually focusing on things. Like there's a big point where you meet these characters and then these characters do something a little different, and it's just sort of perplexing, if that makes sense, some of the choices, and I didn't really understand like why. It was just kind of like random nonsense at times. And that in itself, I wish that the storytelling elements would have been evolved a bit more for this expansion, or kind of, like, even by the end of it, and I get the gist of where everything kind of, like, ended up, if that makes sense. Like, I do understand the story, and, you know, you have to, like, read into it and stuff to actually get an idea of anything in this, which is silly beyond belief, but, you know, I do get what they're going for, but, like, it's still just, this whole thing doesn't feel very fulfilling, and it just doesn't resonate with that, you know, because I think it was like a 2-year wait for this sort of thing. And I'm just really I feel like I'm let down by it, just because it was almost, I think it was almost hyped up too much or something like that. If the bosses would have taken like half as long or under, that would have been sweet. But yeah, and then there's like these annoying like secondary type bosses everywhere that you have to fight, and it's just kind of annoying because I want more of the idea of like the exploration, and you get glimpses like this where you get to go through these visible, like, beautiful, unique visible locations that just like really bring some kind of magical like essence and discovery to them, and they feel so cool and overgrown and crazy. But they're just kind of bogged down by like crazy bosses, wild moments, aggressiveness, combat that's annoying, changes to your experience in ways that I don't think really add to the world of Elden Ring. And it's like, you know what? As I said, I think the hardcore, top-notch selection of players will have, you know, a great time with this, sure, right? But, like, I think regular players are going to find this to be a little ridiculous and not really fully mesh with what this has to offer. That's kind of the big thing, is there's different tiers of who would really get into this. And I just gotta say, like, best of luck if you do attempt to actually tackle the challenges of this place, because it is a little ridiculous. Like, I really don't know how well people are going to do exploring this world. And I mean, if you're up for the challenge, you know, best of luck to you. I do think this game really does look quite like beautiful though, and on Series S it does look pretty good, and it does run decently well. But I think you'll be used to some of the performance hiccups and issues too as you go through it. But you know, it's Elden Ring's expansion. It's apparently the only one we're getting. I do kind of wish there would have been something more beyond this, because I do want more sort of the full, like, the base game. And just this DLC was just like a scope too far in terms of pushing things from a difficulty standpoint and a gameplay standpoint, and not in a direction that felt as fulfilling and interesting and dynamic as the main game did. And I think I'm being very fair and kind, especially if you've seen the pressures of like how ridiculous this was when I was streaming it. Like, I did not have fun playing this, and I really genuinely hated this expansion to the game. And I'm just sort of glad that I'm basically just wrapping up on it, as this was torturous to get to. And that's a shame, because, you know, the exploration stuff and the looks so cool in this, and the scale of this is so cool. I just wish it was more fun to like visit and move through and explore and take in. And I don't know why they had to make everything so utterly ridiculous and over the top, to the point that it just drove me almost insane having to like fight these crazy bosses that are just wonky and hard to hit and hard to deal with. So good luck in Elden Ring if you choose to go down this path.